we're going to be talking about sexuality, gender issues. I'm Sally Land, the son and Dear Deidre's resident agony aunt, and I'm joined today by two fantastic guests. We have Reenee Singh, who's the psychotherapist, very experienced. One of the many areas that she has huge experience in is sexuality and gender issues as well. So thank you for coming. Welcome.
Sure. Thank you.
And we also have the very fabulous Scarlett Harlett, who you may know as the Cockney Princess off the telly. Scarlett is an absolutely stunning drag queen. So thank you very much for joining us here today, both of you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Welcome. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what do you think is the biggest misconception around sexuality and gender identity? Scarlett, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I would say I think the biggest misconception is that everything is so black and white. I think the idea that, male, female, blue, pink, all these things you're taught as a child, I think that, we need to sometimes take a step back and realise that those were all taught by people that didn't really know any better at the time, and that's been ingrained in society. And, in reality, if you really think about it, there is no rule book. The fact that we're living by these rules is kind of a bit outdated and a bit silly, and I think that I think it's time to chuck those in a bin and start afresh and write our own book, and so
rip up the rule book.
Exactly. And so I think the biggest misconception is that I think that living by these rules and teaching these to our kids is just something that's getting a bit outdated now, and even though I was taught it, look where I am now. I'm sitting here and I'm dressed fabulously and I look amazing. And
you do. I can vouch for that.
Thank you so much. It's because you're sitting quite far away, that's why. So.
You were actually talking a little bit earlier about sex education at school and how everything that was presented to you was heterosexual sex education and how utterly irrelevant actually it was to you in your case.
Exactly. And also it wasn't even very detailed even at that. I mean, I hate to say it, but even for the straight people and whatever that were in the class with me, they barely got any education on it back then. So, let alone gay people and queer people, I think at the time, maybe touching upon gay issues might have happened, but, that's not to speak about the wider range of all of the other different types of people out there that have different sexual experiences that don't just live by the standard, man and man, woman and woman, blah, 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 blah. So I think that, there is a lot more to explore there that, just never was brought up to me as a child. And that navigation is, I think, the thing that a lot of queer people, struggle with the most. Is, you have to learn completely on your own because, society as a whole, which you should really learn from, isn't telling you that. And, you have to just, go in there blind, like you're in the movie Bird Box.
Yeah. and it is improving, isn't it? There are support groups and good charities that give good information, the
and
Bowman
representation
Society
on TV as well.
Yeah.
I think that helps massively too. So
that's a huge part of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Reenee,
yes, well, I agree with what both of you said, but I'm kind of trying to extend it to the work that I do with couples and families.
Yes.
And I completely agree that there is no right way to do couples and families. You do have to learn it. You do have to navigate it by yourself. There are all these discourses around there in society about what couples and families ought to be like and what they should look like.
Yeah.
And sometimes these can be really constraining for the couples and families because they believe that there's only one right way to do it. But there are lots of polyamorous couples and families nowadays, for example.
Yeah.
There are lots of people who don't identify, as you said, as either man or woman or, and there's lots of children struggling with gender and young people struggling with gender identity issues. So I agree with you that sometimes it is fixed. Sometimes, you might be born in one body and feel that you ought to be a man or a woman when you're not. A lot of the time, I think it's quite fluid.
Yeah.
And it's how we help people, couples and families and individuals, sort of negotiate these sort of discourses about what sexuality is and see how they fit with their own experiences.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is really important.
Okay, I think we're probably ready for our first letter.
Dear Deirdre, my husband has just come out to me as bisexual. I feel like he's been lying to me throughout our entire relationship and I don't know who he is anymore. I'm 40 and he's 42. We've been married for 6 years and together for 12. He's been very distant lately and yesterday I asked him what was wrong. I was expecting him to say he was having a hard time at work. Instead he broke down and admitted that he had been having fantasies about other guys. He said absolutely nothing had happened and it won't because he loves me. But years ago, before we met, he had 2 sexual encounters with men. One happened when he was a teenager and he and his mate had oral sex. The second incident took place in a nightclub when he was in his 20s. He and another man shared a drunken kiss. He says he feels better for telling me, but I'm devastated. I could forgive the sexual experimentation. After all, he hasn't cheated and it happened before we met. What hurts is that he's lied to me about who he is. We've talked about past relationships and who we find attractive many times. Not once has he mentioned liking other men. He's known he's bi for most of his life, since he was 14, and never told anyone before because he felt confused and ashamed. But I'm his wife. I tell him everything. He should have been able to trust me and be honest. I can't speak to anyone about this because it's not my secret to share. My biggest worry is that he still isn't being completely honest with me. I've read that sometimes men come out as bi when really they're gay, and eventually they come out properly and leave their wives. What can I do?
So I can see why the wife might be so worried, and it does sound like a real revelation to sort of think that, you know, someone has been lying to you for so long. But I would really invite her to think about sexuality as much more fluid, as we said. And also that sexuality changes over different times of the life cycle. So her husband might have identified as bisexual when he was in his 20s and then not really expressed that. And now, you know, for some reason, is again kind of beginning to have fantasies. But I think she's also confusing the fantasies with reality. And just the fact that he has these fantasies doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to act on them. In fact, he hasn't acted on them for a long time. And as she says, this sexual experimentation was before they even met. But maybe there's this sort of notion, which I've found that lots of my clients have, that the partners should be completely honest and upfront with each other about everything, including their fantasies. And I think that might be a false idea, and that actually people could be allowed to have their fantasies and they don't have to confess everything. And maybe the wife could kind of try and understand the meaning of this communication better. Why is he choosing to tell her now, you know? What else is happening? What does it say about their relationship? So if she uses this to think about, is he trying to communicate something that's happening between them? You know, if she focuses more on the relationship and what else might be happening, rather than getting so threatened by a fantasy, which he may not act on, you know. And the whole thing about secrets is that they kind of flourish on the lack of communication and on the shame around them. So if she were to sort of take away the shame and secrecy around it and think, wow, it's wonderful that he's been able to actually have this conversation with her, and it must show how much he trusts her and the good things about their relationship, the fact that they can communicate, and actually just keep that space open for him to come and talk to her when he feels like, you know, and help him with it. So I think really, in other words, instead of being so threatened, although it's completely understandable, to actually slow down and understand the meaning of his communication.
Thank you. And Scarlett, what are your thoughts?
Excuse me. I think it's quite interesting. I would like to touch upon something that they specifically said about how they wish that their partner had been open and honest with them. Because I think there's something interesting also about what Reenee said, how, you know, you can live with these fantasies and you don't always, you know, maybe it's not always the best idea to possibly divulge this because, you know, in a sense that it could bring your partner a lot of pain and a lot of, you know, hurt. But there's a strange kind of dichotomy there, not to use a big word, but I just did, that, you know, the woman asks for her husband to be open and honest, but at the same time, is that really what she may have wanted, you know, because, you know, a lot of the time, you know, we don't have the mental process and the ideas and the knowledge to really deconstruct what that means, you know. If she may have listened to this first and then realised, you know, and listened to what he had to say, who knows? But on her own, having to do that and to battle that and to internally kind of understand what that means, it is hard enough for anyone to understand. It really is. Like, you know, I can, from my own experience, say that growing up as a gay person and a queer person and all of that, like, it is incredibly tough to deconstruct. It takes years to deconstruct what these things mean. Yeah. And clearly, you know, this guy who understands that he's bisexual, it only really kind of puts a spotlight on the fact that that is really a reflection of not only like me and how I kind of struggled with my sexuality, but a reflection of how we all kind of struggle with our sexuality, and how it can take such a repressive path when it's not correctly dealt with, you know. My heart goes out to him because, and the wife as well, because they now have to deal with this issue that could easily have been kind of discussed and deconstructed decades ago.
Yes. You know? And I do agree with that. Yes, and I do think that's something like individual therapy for him, but couples therapy as well.
Absolutely
helpful.
I agree.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. You've both sort of touched on the truth. She's saying she wishes he'd been truthful with her, but now she is learning the truth. She doesn't like what she's hearing. And as you say, is it always necessary to be completely open if it's not necessarily going to hurt somebody?
But also, I mean, you know, what has he processed? Because if he had been able to process this separately, then he might have communicated it to her in a different way, or not at all, or at a different time.
Yes,
you know?
Yes.
So I think it's both the meaning of the communication for the couple relationship, but also what sense he makes of it for himself before he does that.
And having the right tools to process this, you know, because it's easy to just to take this and completely take it down such a path that has led to him, you know, being stuck in this situation. If he had the tools to begin with, you know, and she had the tools to begin with, we all are human beings that are able to expand our minds. That, you know, if we had the tools to do so, she could have, you know, come to terms with this, and they could have, you know, as a couple, and having couples therapy can come to an understanding that these fantasies and these things are a part of who he is, that has no kind of indication on him going astray or going to cheat. You know, he it's just an internal battle that he needs to understand that now has become her internal battle, because she's taken on the weight of her husband's identity and all of that, which, you know, again, with couples therapy or something like that, those are the kind of things that the knowledge is needed to be able to deconstruct that and understand that it's really okay, because that's not a reflection on if he wants to cheat or to go with a man. It's just about his internal struggle and how to live with that in the right way and still stay married and still stay faithful. And, you know, those can go hand in hand.
Stay in a loving relationship.
Exactly.
And most people's fantasies, they don't actually want to act on them. There's such a big difference, isn't there, between what can go on in your head and what you actually want to happen. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a threat there. People worrying that saying you are bisexual is almost a gateway to actually beginning to admit that you're gay.
I rolled my eyes when that came up. I'm not going to lie.
It's a theme that we get in our letters every single day. What are your thoughts?
Well,
sorry.
No, I'll just say that honestly is almost like the oldest trope in the book. Yeah, it's like it speaks to the society that we're in now, the fact that that's still coming up. Like, we should be past that idea, because that literally just says that what you're really saying is that, like, bisexual people don't exist, and it's just like, you know, you're gay or you're straight. It all goes back to these labels that we have been so ingrained in us that, like, we can't even add in a third one, really. It's like, you're gay and you're straight. It's like complete bi erasure in there, which is like, honestly, it baffles my mind, because I know so many bisexual people, so many fluid people, that is a humongous part of the spectrum, humongous. And it's just the fact that it still comes up in today's society really tells you how much work is needed, because like these labels aren't enough. And then it leads to situations like this where you're like, oh, what really is he? Oh, he says he's bisexual, but it's just a gateway. It's like, no, you like, if you really had the tools to allow him to deconstruct how he really felt, then you'd realise that these labels don't really mean much, because he could fall anywhere on the spectrum, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, and almost putting a label on it just completely throws stigma into the fire as well, of being like, oh, well, that means this and that means that. You almost want to take a step back from saying like, oh, I'm bisexual or I'm gay, I'm straight, because then they also come with a lot of, connotations of what things mean. You need to deconstruct that and understand that within yourself to really process it, I'd say.
Thank you. We'll go to the second letter.
Dear Deirdre, my wife caught me wearing a dress, a long blonde wig and full makeup when she got back early from visiting her parents. After that, all hell broke loose. She is dead against it and wants no part in it. I've been a cross-dresser since my teens. I'm now 47 and my wife is 45. We've been married for 18 years. I've always wanted to tell my wife, but she won't listen. I've promised to stop, but deep down there, I know these urges will never go away, as I've always cross-dressed. What should I do to make things better with my wife?
Oh, that's tough. And also I want to say that there's absolutely nothing wrong with wearing a lovely long blonde wig, first off. So I won't have anything said against that.
Scarlett, the longer the better.
Exactly.
I'm sure you'll agree.
I want it to touch my bum. I want it to be that long. But no, like when I hear that, I automatically think about how I will openly say that I have had sexual experiences with men that have been in very similar situations as him. Because, again, I feel that I live my life beyond what these labels are, and I do like to have sexual experiences with people that are on the spectrum and are have different ideas about what sexuality is and what they enjoy. And so I think that has helped me, first off, to really understand how people really identify or view their sexuality. But I think that if I had a penny for every time I've spoken to a quote unquote straight man that likes to just put some heels on or to put a wig on, it's no different from me. If you think about that, I just because I'm gay and I like to do it, that is socially acceptable. Because I'm gay, I'm already being placed on the outskirts of society, so why don't you just let them dress up anyway, because they're already over there living their own lives and rules and whatnot. It's a lot harder for someone that still wants to quote unquote fit in to traditional society, that wants to do these things and has it inside them to do these things, and how are they supposed to express them? Because you want to as I've touched upon earlier, it is an integral part of my identity to be able to dress up and to harness that feminine energy that I've got. Like when I do drag, I use that as like a vehicle to get all of the girly stuff out, so that when I'm out of drag, it's just it's almost like a freedom, because I've been able to express that side of me. And I think that there are a lot of men, straight men, that maybe need to do that, and that's okay. Does that mean he's going to go and cheat on you? No. It's look at Caitlyn Jenner. She's a good example, because she she identifies as, I believe, lesbian, and so she likes women, and so I remember hearing stories about how she would dress up and all of that, and as a straight man, when she identified as a straight man before, I think that really shows you that it doesn't matter who you are. You could be at the absolute top of society like the Kardashians, and you can still want to do this stuff, and that isn't going to go away. You can't just say oh gosh, I'm on TV, or I'm a business executive, I'm a CEO, I'm this, I'm that, I can't do this. It's that is a part of you, and you need to be able to understand that, deconstruct it, and have people around you that are going to support that and give you really the right tools to do it properly and not shame you for it, so
it's that shame, isn't it, the theme that runs through. And Reenee, he says he's promised he'll stop cross-dressing. What would you say to him? Is that possible? Should he even be trying to stop?
Well, I like the idea that he's playing with something, you know, so he's expressing a part of himself that he can't express in other ways, that he's playing with his feminine side, that he's enjoying, you know, just the whole process of dressing up and wearing makeup and wearing a wig. But the thing is, I'm thinking about the couple relationship.
Yes.
So what would I do? And sure, I do feel a lot of sympathy for him, but I also do feel some sympathy for her.
Yes,
I have had clients in this predicament. And what can you do to either help her to understand what this means to him without shaming him?
Yeah. And
so that, I mean, could they even play with this kind of thing together, for example? But if she absolutely can't, then I guess, you know, maybe it might be time to think about different kinds of options for them.
Yeah. Helping them through that process.
Yes. And, you know, making a transition. Because the thing is he really going to stop? Does he want to stop? Is it fair to expect him to stop?
Yes.
But also, is it fair to expect her to put up with something that she might have such a sort of deep aversion to?
Yes.
So I guess if I was working with this couple, I would try and help them both to understand first individually what it is that they're coming up against, you know. Because it could be that this might have been a sort of something that he liked to kind of do when he was younger, but now he might have decided that he does actually want to stop, especially if he thinks about the effect it has on him. So I guess, again, looking at it kind of relationally, you know, without sort of, I mean, I can't think why it would be so hard for her to accept it, but it might just really be something that she can't handle, or it's too threatening, or too shameful for her in some ways, you know, too alien.
I think, again, one of the most common themes we get letters on is from straight men who love dressing up because it's an expression of their feminine side. They don't want to change gender. They don't want to have a gay relationship. They don't consider themselves bisexual. They just want that outlet to get dressed up and feel feminine.
Absolutely.
And often it is when the wives understand that and educated around that, the barriers break down. But yes, as you say, they have to work out what's going to work for them as a couple.
Absolutely.
Dear Deidre, I've fallen out with my older sister, Georgia, because she's a narrow-minded bigot. At a family party recently, I was shocked to hear her make a really homophobic comment. Since then, I haven't been able to bring myself to speak to her. We always used to be close, but lately I can barely speak to her without rolling my eyes at her views. We have another sister, Caroline, 48, whose daughter, 15, has just come out as gay. She's always had traditionally male interests, so it wasn't a big surprise. At the party, Georgia was very nice to the young woman's face and supportive of Caroline. But when they weren't in earshot, she turned to me and said, I blame Caroline for turning her into a lesbian. She claimed it was because she'd been allowed to play football and play with other boys as a child. I was horrified at her ignorance. If she was a friend, I'd just stop speaking to her. But she's my sister. How do I make her see she's wrong?
I know, this will touch a few nerves, won't it, for you, Scarlett?
Yeah, I know. That's just... I'll let Reenee go first because I've got a piece of this
count to 10.
Makes you angry.
It's just like the same. You're hearing the exact same thing that has been going on for so long now, and you just want to shake these people and be like there are different ways to deal with this that are so much more healthy, and it's really not as dramatic and as apocalyptic as you are acting it is.
Yes.
You know, we are just human beings.
Yes.
But anyway, I'll let Reenee go first.
Yes. Quick, Reenee.
Yeah. Well, no, I was just thinking it's so interesting because what do you do when your politics are different from those of your family members? And for me, that's what it boils down to, really. You know, and you take these sort of completely entrenched positions, you know. And sure, I can completely understand because it makes me angry too, thinking how could her sister be so ignorant and how could she be so homophobic and how could she be so narrow-minded, you know, and have these sort of fixed conceptions in this day and age. But on the other hand, how can the person who wrote the letter, her sister, sort of try and think of other things that they might have in common? Why does she feel this need to change her sister's mind, you know? why can't differences even within families be tolerated? And why couldn't she just, leave that be? I mean, sure, she can have a go at educating her sister, and I think that might be a good thing to do.
Yeah.
But in a sort of rational way, not an angry, emotive way.
Yes.
But to, not in the way of, how dare you think like this, or how can you be my sister and still think like this?
Yes.
But in the sense of really sitting down with her and having a talk and explaining to her.
Yes.
About sexuality and sexual orientation and how it works. And if that doesn't help, then I guess she would just sort of naturally drift away from her sister and distance herself. They can still be sisters, and I'm sure they have other things in common.
Yes.
Their parents and, a history, a past and family obligations. They don't have to be close. I mean, who says that sisters, adult sisters, especially at 57 and 56, however old they are, need to be close?
Yes.
So I guess, a lot of the work I do with adult families is to try and help them to think that, you don't have to be best friends with your siblings, really. You can be very different.
Yeah.
And you can also put the boundaries down. I mean, one of the things she could do is just to say, well, I don't want to have this conversation.
Yes.
Because it makes me terribly angry. It's ignorant, it's homophobic, it's not the way in which I want to lead my life, and I don't want it around me. But, she doesn't have to listen to it if she doesn't agree with it,
Yes.
So I guess she has a range of options.
Yes.
I don't know if that fits at all with what
No,
you had in mind.
I agree. I think that the overwhelming thing that I think about when I hear this letter is how, like, these tropes that we're taught as children and teenagers, that, that gay people and lesbians and whatever are this kind of person, and the separation there, right? This is a perfect example of how harmful those things can eventually come to be in our everyday lives, to a point where we have one life to live, and we are choosing to separate ourselves from our family members, our partners, our whatever, because we are not. A lot of us don't have the capacity to sit there and say, you know what, why do I think this way about lesbians? What really makes me think that, just because they played football or whatever, or did this or did that, that makes them a lesbian, or that's forced them to become a lesbian. It's like, if we really need to sit down and deconstruct these ideas. But the thing is, again, it goes back to the fact that when you're not taught these things, it almost always, I mean, I'm sure you can shed some light on this, almost always comes out in an almost defensive mechanism that not only sadly is projected by the straight people that have these ideas of, like, okay, well, I don't like it because it's different, and lesbians are like this and gay people like that, but also sadly on this side of the fence, you almost have to build a defense mechanism in order to deal with that when it's thrown at you. So then you grow up with having two clashing kind of defense mechanisms here, that really is one person saying, I don't like this because it's very different, and then you have the other person saying, I'm different, but this is who I am, and
Yes.
and I understand myself, and that's okay. But they almost don't work, because again, there is no tools there to understand how they could work in their mind. They don't fit together, but that's completely not the truth. Like, the fact that gay people and lesbians and everyone in the LGBTQ plus community, a part of our growing up is that you need to deconstruct this stuff in order to live your best life.
Yeah.
I had to do that as a teenager in order to dress up. I had to completely unbox the shame that came with dressing as a woman, and unbox the shame that came with being a feminine man. And, there's a lot of work in that. The sister, the straight sister,
Yes.
she obviously has never had to do this. And so she can't understand or relate to what her other sister is going through.
Yes.
And I think, sadly, because of what they've had to deal with, instead of having that open and honest conversation, it becomes, well, I don't like you because of this, and I don't like you because of that, and no real issue is being solved there.
Yeah.
And then that ends up just trailing off into two sisters that don't talk, that could have been so close and been friends over something other than the fact that she's a lesbian, which is really nothing to, it's just a small part of her identity in the grand scheme of things.
And you're both picking up on very similar issues with this letter, that there's two ends of the discourse and there's very little in between, isn't there? So they can't discuss it. As you're saying, they haven't got the tools, so you get these polarised arguments. And as you said, Reenee, they do have options. She can set out the boundaries. She can say, it's not acceptable to me, I'm going to end the conversation. There are tools there, but as a society as a whole, we're not using those tools very often, are we?
But what I find interesting is the other sister, who only gets a mention because of her daughter, who's lesbian. And maybe it's the daughter, the niece, who can be the one to actually help her two aunties by sitting down and talking to them about her choices, So if I was working with the whole family, I would definitely invite the other sister and the niece in.
Oh, I would too. I think that's a great idea.
To explain that process of why she's encouraged her to enjoy her interests.
Yes, because young people these days are able to shed more light on the fluidity of sexuality and all of that, because it thankfully we are in a society where we are slowly but surely deconstructing these ideas. And I think young people are way more switched on to that. And there's a reason why there are a lot more LGBT people out there, because they are more switched on about what these things mean. And I think that voice, that kind of third party voice, is something that really could be used in their scenario, because they only have their own ideas and how they've had to deal with their existence their entire lives. You build up these mechanisms to deal with these things, but having a young person that identifies as lesbian but hasn't built up these kind of stigmatisms on it is something that really could be a breath of fresh air for them.
And really turn those perceptions on their head.
Absolutely.
Or even the mother, the other sister, because she might be more educated by now. She might actually understand the process that her daughter's gone through.
Yes, and you were talking, Scarlett, about the unboxing. The mum and the daughter will have been through that process.
Yes.
Would you be happy to explain a little bit more about what that was like for you? When, for example, how did you unbox the fact that you enjoyed dressing up?
Sure. I mean, the funny thing is that I can even to this day sit here and say that I think that I go beyond the labels of like gay and all of this, because with me dressing up and all of that, yes, I do like men, but aside from that, with my gender identity and all of that, I really don't enjoy putting labels on it. If I had to, I would say I was non-binary, because that would be the closest to it, but I don't even really enjoy having to say that, because I know that in itself, these labels always come with ideas. So I remember when I was younger, I used to struggle immensely with how society would view me as a gay person. I really I care a lot about what people think, and I especially did when I was a child. I remember distinctly walking down the street and thinking, oh, am I walking too gay? Am I walking too gay? I need to fix that. And it came to a point where, thankfully, a double-edged sword, but when I was in school, I didn't have many friends. So I was able to sit alone and think about these things and to really deconstruct that within myself. I think that's what sparked my interest in psychology, because I would completely analyse myself all the time and understand why I felt this way. I was harassed last week from the back of a cab by a bunch of what I assume is straight men when they saw me from another car with my drag queen friend. They first saw us, and I believe they found us attractive, because I could tell they were wolf whistling and all that,
flirting with you.
Yeah, and then I realised slowly that they had realised that we weren't women.
Yeah,
and that very quickly turned into aggression, and just like they basically wound down the window and said, "You dirty." C words, or as RuPaul likes to say, charisma, uniqueness, nerve and talent. So and even last week I had to deal with that. I had to take on their kind of stigmatism, their energy, and to process that, and sadly I felt internally myself go back to that kind of primitive place of being like, well, you can't tell me what to do because I'm living my best life. And a lot of us have had to grow up with that idea of being like, well, I'm just going to have a defense mechanism and you can't tell me what to do. But, sometimes you really need to understand like yourself, and to be able to, listen to these things and not let it affect you and not let it bother you, because if you did, you will live a miserable life, because you will get discrimination wherever you go. Sadly, it's a part of life, and it's how you deal with these things and how you process them internally that really matters, and how that reflects onto other people.
Yeah. Thank you for being so honest.
No, I appreciate it.
In summary, if you were to give somebody who is struggling with their sexuality and or gender identity one piece of advice, what would it be?
So I would suggest sit down and give yourself, the freedom to not judge yourself.
Yeah.
Understand that you will have these prejudices in your head because society has told us that that's the way things are. But as long as you can understand that is there and look at it almost from an outside perspective, you'll really more understand how your brain works and who you really are.
Yeah.
And that it's really not as dramatic as it seems, unless you're a drag queen. In that case, everything's dramatic.
It needs to be dramatic.
Exactly, it's part of the job. So.
Thank you very much, Scarlett.
Thank you.
And Reenee?
Well, I was just thinking that what these three letters had in common was a theme of how sexuality and sexual orientation impacts on couple and family relationships.
Yes.
And so for me, I completely agree with everything you said. And that's true. The sort of internal process is really important, whether you do it by yourself or whether you do it with a therapist or whether you do it with a group or a friend or whoever. But I think there's another bit to it. And that bit is how you communicate about these issues and how, after understanding yourself, how you can then not let it impact on your couple and family relationships, or at least have a clear and honest way of talking about it with people whom you love, and whether that's with the help of a therapist, a professional in the room who can actually help you to have this conversation. I think that really the key to all of it is to be able to talk about it, communicate about it, in a clear and thoughtful way.
Yes.
But also not to be terribly influenced by any right way of doing things. And that's what I come back to. There are no sort of rights and wrongs about this. They're just sort of, sometimes there's a mismatch. Sometimes in a couple relationship, there's one partner who prefers to have sex in a particular kind of way, whether it's with other people or, more often, or has a whole lot of wild fantasies that don't fit in for the other partner. And so it's finding something that fits for both of them, really, and it's just being able to live with that and understand it and not get too terribly bogged down by it, I guess.
Absolutely.
That's easier said than done, I'm sure.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed having you.
Yeah, well,
Absolutely loved it.